So we will have our initial pose. So an arms crossed pose basically indicates strength, control, position, authority, all the words that come with that. So I'm going to cross my arms. Like so. And then we do the arm weave here. Hard for a rig to do. Let me just hide some of these controllers. Okay. Center of gravity is more of a bend, and then the legs are going to be a bit more spread. So you notice, the reference is more like sitting down. But for me here, we can generate something that's more interesting. Okay, so something like this. He's in a position of authority or whatever. Okay, so there's our pose 1. It looks also like he's kind of cold. So I'm going to straighten out his legs, okay? And one leg would be forward. So if you notice here, I'm not looking at reference in terms of generating this pose. I'm looking at the audio, or I'm listening to my audio to create my narrative here. So this is my first pose. It has something to do with what I look here, but I'm not, I'm not standing up. I mean, if it helps, like, you guys should stand up and do the whole pose, like full body, of course. So 3 weeks from now, from here, like he's doing a speech, right? So in my case, when he does 3 weeks from now, I'm not going to make my character stupid and, like, do the number 3, because no one does that. So I'm taking the, like, I'm being smart about this. I'm not, like, that dumb, so to speak. I'm just going to say, like, hey, in acting, he's going to say 3 weeks from now, but really, like, what he's trying to make a point of is, like, he's, like, thinking about a moment in time, right? So I'm just going to create, like, a pointed finger here. So if I make this pose, unlike Phoenix, I'm going to move the entire body to accommodate this new thought pattern. So despite the arm still being, like, held onto in this boss position, I know now that the attention shifts to the fingers, so his body starts to offset this way to the left to generate a little bit of space for this new character that's joined in. Okay? So audio's low there. I'm going to bump that up. Then he will shift to I will be harvesting my crops, which is thinking in the other way, right? So I'm going to grab his arm. I can even return to the original pose because I know that this kind of looks like the same as my boss position. But what I'm going to do is select all my controllers and then set a keyframe for each one of these major ones. So when he's going to go back to this, I'm going to go back to my first frame and I'm going to middle mouse. Hold middle mouse, go to that, press S. Now I have the first frame onto my third frame. But in this case, he's going to lean towards where the index finger was, because he's starting to lean into his thoughts, and his thoughts were left where his finger was. This is how you should start to think when you're making these narratives about your animation. There is always some sort of logic and thought pattern behind these things, and the more you put these logics and thinking into it, the more your animation will be more true. So I'm not using IK. I'm using my knowledge of physiology, understanding that in order to move the wrist that way, I will need to move my clavicle, my shoulder, my elbow, and my wrist. Let me get my thinking pose there. I'll get that to go there, and then I'll get my ring and pinky to fold in like so. And that is me thinking. Okay? Study in context where we're headed here. Make sure that the poses are not boring. So if you notice here, I mindfully created this pose, this composition to create this. And then when he does return to his thoughts, it's going to be slightly distinct from this initial one. So you see how he shifts? He's physically shifting his weight from left. There, the thought, he left his thought here. Here's the idea. 3 weeks from now. So if you're thinking like in comic book terms, you can almost see like a caption here, 3 weeks from now, or his hopes are right here. His hopes and thoughts are right in this area. So what's the next move? We're going to pose the character to lean into that. So you see how I'm combining what I'm shooting here with some artistic and creative interpretation of that. Imagine what you will be. So he thinks this is the dumbest pose I've ever made. So what I'm going to do instead is kind of like add a little bit of dignity to it. And that dignity with the imagination is he's going to turn to think the other way. So imagine what you will be. It's still so stupid. But we'll just make something that's somewhat better than what we have. And you guys have the, you know, the luxury and convenience of like reshooting, retesting your pose. Take like 20 takes if you have to. Because you're training yourself now to be your own reference. You're making that critical, you're doing critical thinking, but also you're putting yourself in your character's shoes, which will ultimately translate to your character doing what you just went through. And it will be so. Okay? So the last and final pose. Again, I'm making sure I'm keyframing everything here. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 major key poses. So the main difference here with this punchline is that whilst everything is contained within the center of his body, this one becomes the full expression of go get what you were hoping for. Go forth. Take action. Be active. So I will mindfully make that thought process. I would probably even make him like more of a clawing type look. We'll see. So let's see here. For fingers. Yeah, I had the controllers on the other one. I'm going to make him look more like he's going to claw. He's clawing his thoughts. And it will be so. So for claw, you just select the top bit of that, rotate that in, and then you select the outer bits of it. Oops, and you rotate that out. The claw is a very strong, active pose. Predatory and intentional. Deliberate. Okay? And in this case, I think I'm going to maybe just have him look at camera or something. But you see, like, I'm just reinterpreting what I did as an interpretation here. That's why I'm actually having a hard time to get it, because much like we shoot our reference, your reference here should be like as perfect as you can get it. Kind of like what we saw with Cassandra's example. Like, if the reference is so on point, then all you need to do is like do a little bit of these tweaks. But on my end, look what the difference is between this pose and this pose, where I'm a lot more happy with. It's got the same aura and same vibe, but it's definitely two distinct poses. That's very similar. That's totally similar. This detracts a bit. And that's similar. Okay? So now the next step here is to establish moving holds between these 4 or 5 major key poses. So let's see. So 3 weeks from now, so he's still in that pose here. He's still right here. So here, I'm going to copy and paste that. Copy, paste. Now we have a moving hold here. If you're better, I would identify this as the end of my key pose. I'd just set a key frame here just to set my marker. And then somewhere in here, where I'm very similar to this pose, I would middle mouse this. Middle mouse it to my marker. Hit S. You see how it's similar? There's going to be a moving hold. And if I wanted to, actually, I would enhance that moving hold by slightly just moving his demeanor here and folding him in a bit more, so that he has a little bit more activity in that torso. So you see that? Like, there's a little bit more kind of like getting ready for the next move. So I will be harvesting my crops. It's going to be this pose. I'm just going to select this, get ready to copy it. Copy. I'm looking at my reference here. He's still frozen. So right there, right before he moves, copy, paste. Set my tangent to automatic. Okay. Now I'm going to pick a slight move here. I'm going to go a couple frames after the fact, 165. And I'm going to middle mouse that to 160. Just so that that moving hold, there's a little bit of movement there. So you see how he floats a little bit. That's too much of a float for me. So I'm actually going to move closer to my original pose here and middle mouse it back here. Watch what happens to the graph editor when I hit S. Watch this curve when I hit S. It starts to tighten back up because I've selected a key pose that's closer to this guy now. So there's still a slight bit of movement, but not as much. So then the crops, he's thinking. Copy that again. Copy, paste. Auto tangent. Hold that thought here. Copy this thought. Right before he shifts, paste that thought. Pasting it here in your graph editor, not here, not creating another rig there. Okay? So if you notice the next step, there are all these dead areas. You're going to see one move. You're going to see a transition. You're going to see frozen pose. You're going to see a transition. You're going to see frozen pose, transition, frozen pose, transition. What I mean by frozen pose is that's your moving hold. That makes sense, right? You see the pattern. That's what locks it into these poses. You're moving from pose to pose to pose. Okay? That's all, says our guy. So once you're done here, you're going to hide your reference. Job's done here for the reference. All we wanted to do was identify a pose for an audio cue. Now, the bare requirement for this homework is to do this here, this one that I'm going to do. I want you now to retime these poses to where it's more appropriate to the audio. So if we're listening to this thing again, you're going to see that the poses don't quite correspond to the audio. We're listening. Do you guys hear that? You guys hear my audio, right? Yeah? It doesn't make sense. Like, it's not connecting. Like, when he's talking, he's still, like, standing there. But somehow, when we shot in our reference, like, we were moving based on audio, but the moment we take away audio, miraculously, by some weird reason, our animation doesn't line up. This happens almost all the time when you're doing reference to audio. Unless you're doing like Cassandra stuff where it's like super tight, like super prescriptive. This stuff, when you get reference, a bunch of these poses will never line up to the actual thought. And this is where the animation, the animator starts to kick in. Where do you retime these new poses now that you've created? Where do they go appropriately in this time frame, in this soundbite time frame? So I'm going to listen again. Yeah, he's just way off. So this is I will be harvesting my crops, and he's already like pointing. So what I'm going to do is offset this. So when he says, yeah, so the moment he says I will be harvesting my crops, that's when he's actually starting to point. So now I'm offsetting my entire animation as a unit because it's still clean, right? We just have our moving holds, and that's it. So he goes 3 weeks from now. See, like I will be harvesting my. So this point now becomes I will be harvesting my crops. Harvesting my crops. Perfect. And then imagine what you will be comes in much later. Imagine what you will be right here. And I'm going to tighten this up. I'm going to move it closer. There we go. There's the timing. Oh, so that becomes hold the line. So, okay, so it will be so. So I did offset it, sorry. I messed up. So 3 weeks from now actually is the pointing one, I guess. Although I like it as I will be harvesting my crops. Yeah. So this is like the part where you're going to be like, for me, my solution would just be to abandon this pose. I was never a fan of this thinking pose here. And actually just hack it and just, and it will be so. Like this is how I would do this assignment here. This will be this. That's appropriate. Like that's so much better. But because of what we recorded, like our reference was so terrible, how I would do it based on that is I will be harvesting my crops will be here. So it goes 3 weeks from now. So the moment he says 3 weeks from now, that's when he points. So earlier, I'm looking for audio cues here. When he said 3 weeks from now, that's his action. But 3, by the time he's saying 3, he's already finished pointing. There. So as he's saying, I will be harvesting my crops, that's your transition to the next pose. Okay? And imagine what you will be. We'll now transition to the next one. And then it will be so is that last part. Okay? So, this is minimum, although in order for you to kind of like get here, like yeah, if you're busy or if you're strained, like I want to see at minimum this, like this clean interpretation. Definitely a video of you, definitely audio of you, or audio of your whatever movie it is, and this clean pattern here. For people who want to go further, I want you guys to take the 4-step thing that we talked about. This is only keyframe 1 and 3. I want you to generate keyframe 2, which is going to be this as I'm demoing it. Keyframe 2 is going to be this, where you generate the arc and like creating torque for that action. And I'm actually going to create like an extra keyframe here for this wrist flick here. And then to follow through here. This is keyframe 4, where the shoulders push through. Actually, the elbow punches in. Yep, go for it. It's recorded. I'll see you next week. And then your center of gravity pitches forward a bit. So this is what I want for some of you guys to really get yourself into. Not just these clean 4, this is your clean ones. This is the 4-step keyframe ones that I demonstrated all class long. Okay? First frame, third frame, follow through, and an arc and torque. And you see the difference. You start to see how he creates that action. Alrighty? One last look here, and it will be so. Again, one last demo on the 4 keyframes. This is your first keyframe. This is your third keyframe. Your 4th keyframe will be follow through, and that follow through is just knowing where the momentum of that action is. In this case, the shoulder keeps going through, and the elbows actually punch out more, and so will the wrists. That's your follow through. Okay? Now your in between here is the torque that creates more energy to the action, and that comes from, in this case, bringing in the arms to go up and over so that it creates this circle and this roundedness. And the chest collapses, center of gravity pushes forward, and the head counters just by looking up and tilted a bit, so there's a bit of offset there. And you see it generate right there. Clavicle will probably slightly raise in our 2nd keyframe here, like that. And there we go. Okay? I'm going to save this file without my video there. You'll just see this file in your whatever, just for you to template, and then obviously you can check to make sure that there is a reference here, and that's what your file should look like.